The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory, 1876, as Savannah Moore clutched her bleeding shoulder and stumbled forward. Pain seared through her body, but she refused to look back at the burning remains of her family's homestead. Everything she'd ever known was gone, consumed by flames and violence in a single, devastating night. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, the taste of ash still bitter on her tongue. The moonlight cast long shadows across the prairie as she pushed onward, one foot in front of the other, her vision blurring with each step. Savannah had always been the dutiful daughter, the one who stayed behind to care for her ailing father while her brothers sought their fortunes in the gold fields. At 22, she'd resigned herself to spinsterhood, a sacrifice made willingly for family. Now that family was gone, murdered by land grabbers who'd coveted their modest ranch for months. Blood soaked through her torn calico dress as she stumbled through the tall grass. The wound wasn't deep, but the blood loss and shock were taking their toll. Her legs finally gave way beneath her, and she collapsed into the prairie grass, the vast Wyoming sky spinning above her. "This can't be how it ends," she murmured, fighting to stay conscious as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. The distant howl of a coyote was the last sound she heard before the world went black. Isaac Turner had been tracking the smoke since sunset. Black plumes rising on the horizon never meant anything good in these parts. After 5 years roaming the frontier as a cowhand, tracker, and occasional bounty hunter, he'd developed instincts that rarely led him astray. He'd been on his way to Laramie when he spotted the smoke. Now, as his horse picked its way through the darkness, the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy kept one hand near the Colt revolver at his hip. The territory had grown increasingly dangerous with settlers, cattle barons, and outlaws all fighting for their piece of the untamed land. "Steady, Merlin," he whispered to his black stallion as they crested a small rise. The moonlight revealed a dark shape in the grass ahead, too large for a coyote, too small for a buffalo. "Hold up." Isaac dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He approached cautiously, Colt drawn, until he recognized the shape of a woman lying motionless in the tall grass. "Madam," he called, kneeling beside her. When she didn't respond, he gently turned her over, revealing a pale face framed by dark hair matted with dirt and blood. "Good Lord." His practiced hands quickly found the wound on her shoulder, still seeping blood. She was alive, but barely. Isaac knew the nearest doctor was at least a day's ride away in Laramie. If she was going to survive, he'd need to tend to her immediately. "You picked a bad night to be out here alone, miss," he muttered, lifting her slight form with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. He settled her onto Merlin's back before climbing up behind her, supporting her limp body against his chest. "Let's ride, Merlin," he said softly. "We need to find shelter before she bleeds out." Isaac knew these plains well enough to recall an abandoned line shack about 5 miles east, a simple one-room shelter used by cowboys during cattle drives. It wasn't much, but it would provide protection from the elements and predators while he tended to her wounds. As they rode through the darkness, the woman stirred slightly, murmuring incoherent words before going silent again. Isaac held her more securely, feeling the warmth of her blood soaking into his shirt. "Stay with me," he said, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just a little farther now." The line shack appeared just as Isaac remembered a small, weathered structure standing alone in the vast prairie. He dismounted carefully, carrying Savannah inside while keeping pressure on her wound. The interior was sparse: a small table, a chair, a cast iron stove, and a narrow cot against one wall. Isaac laid her gently on the cot and set about lighting the oil lamp he found on the table. By its dim glow, he assessed her injury more thoroughly. "Bullet went clean through," he observed with relief. "That's something, at least." Years of frontier living had taught Isaac basic medical skills. He retrieved his saddlebags, pulling out a flask of whiskey, clean bandages, and a small sewing kit. After removing her torn sleeve to expose the wound, he cleaned it thoroughly with whiskey, his face grim as she moaned in pain despite her unconscious state. "I'm sorry about this," he said softly as he threaded a needle. "But it's got to be done." With practiced movements, Isaac stitched the entry and exit wounds closed, his large, calloused hands working with surprising delicacy. Once the wounds were closed and bandaged, he built a fire in the stove to ward off the night's chill, and boiled coffee in a battered pot he found on a shelf. As the coffee brewed, Isaac studied the woman more carefully. Even pale and injured, he could see she was beautiful with high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and full lips now drawn tight with pain. Her hands, though small, showed the calluses of hard work. Not a city woman then, but someone familiar with the harsh realities of frontier life. "Who are you?" he wondered aloud. "And who did this to you?" As if in response, she stirred, eyelids fluttering. When they opened, Isaac found himself looking into the deepest blue eyes he'd ever seen, eyes now wide with fear. Savannah woke to searing pain and the unfamiliar sight of a rough-hewn timber ceiling. Disoriented and terrified, she tried to sit up, only to be gently pressed back by a large hand on her uninjured shoulder. "Easy now," came a deep voice. "You'll tear those stitches." She turned her head to see a man tall and broad-shouldered with tanned skin, dark hair, and watchful green eyes. A stranger. Panic surged through her as fragments of memory returned: the attack, the fire, her desperate flight. "Get away from me," she cried, trying again to rise despite the pain that tore through her shoulder. "I'm not going to hurt you," the man said, keeping his distance now, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "I found you unconscious on the prairie. You've been shot." Savannah's hand went to her shoulder, feeling the bandage there. "You dressed my wound." He nodded, moving slowly to pour coffee into a tin cup. "Name's Isaac Turner. I was passing by when I saw smoke from what I'm guessing was your home." The mention of her home brought fresh pain sharper than her physical wound. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "They burned it down. They killed my father." Isaac approached cautiously, offering the cup. "Here, it'll help with the shock." She hesitated before accepting it, wincing as she shifted to sit up slightly. "Savannah Moore," she said after taking a sip of the bitter brew. "Our ranch was on Silver Creek." Recognition flickered in Isaac's eyes. "Moore Ranch. I've ridden past it. Small place, good water." "Too good," Savannah said bitterly. "William Hargrove has been trying to buy us out for months. When father refused again yesterday, I never thought." Her voice broke. "Hargrove," Isaac repeated, his expression darkening. "The cattle baron. He's got a reputation for playing rough, but murder and arson, that's crossing a line even for his type. It was his men. I recognized one of them." Savannah's hands shook, spilling coffee onto the rough blanket. "I hid when they came. I should have done something, but I—" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Isaac took the cup gently from her trembling hands. "You'd be dead too if you had. Getting shot trying to escape was bad enough." "Where are we?" she asked, suddenly aware of how alone they were. "Old Line Shack, about 15 miles east of your ranch. We're safe here for now." He moved to stoke the fire in the stove. "Come morning, we'll need to get you to a doctor in Laramie." Savannah shook her head vehemently. "No. Hargrove owns half the town. His men will be looking for me." Isaac frowned. "You planning to testify against them?" "I have to," she said, determination replacing fear in her eyes. "I'm the only witness. They murdered my father in cold blood." Isaac ran a hand through his dark hair, considering their options. Territory's big. We could head north to Cheyenne instead. They'll expect that. All the main towns. Savannah's mind was clearing now, working through the possibilities. My aunt lives in a settlement called Prosperity near the Medicine Bow Mountains. It's small, out of the way. We'd be safe there. Prosperity, Isaac repeated thoughtfully. I've heard of it. 3, maybe 4 days' ride from here. He studied her pale face. That's a long journey for someone with a bullet wound. I'll manage, she said firmly. I have to. Isaac nodded, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. We'll start at first light. You should rest while you can. As he moved to sit in the chair across the room, Savannah suddenly realized the precariousness of her situation. She was alone in an isolated cabin with a man she'd just met, a situation that would have been unthinkable just days ago. Mr. Turner, she began hesitantly. Thank you for saving my life. He looked up, surprise crossing his features before he offered a slight smile. Isaac, and anyone would have done the same. No, she said softly. They wouldn't have. As night deepened, Savannah found it increasingly difficult to get comfortable on the narrow cot. Every movement sent fresh pain through her shoulder, and whenever she closed her eyes, she saw her home in flames, heard her father's final shouts. Isaac noticed her distress. The pain keeping you awake. That and other things, she admitted. He nodded in understanding, having seen enough violence in his years on the frontier to recognize the haunted look in her eyes. Sometimes the memories are worse than the wounds. Did you fight in the war? She asked, seeking distraction from her own thoughts. Tail end of it. I was young but old enough to see things no one should. He added wood to the stove, his face illuminated by the flickering light. After, I couldn't settle back into farm life in Pennsylvania, headed west instead. And now you're what? A cowboy? A faint smile touched his lips. Sometimes. Tracker hunter, whatever pays honest money, he paused. I was a deputy for a while in Colorado. A lawman. Savannah studied him with new interest. His capable hands, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence, the gun he wore with practiced ease, it made sense. For a time. Until I realized some laws need bending to find justice. His expression darkened momentarily. Town marshal and I disagreed on that point. Savannah shivered, suddenly cold despite the fire. Isaac noticed immediately, reaching for his coat draped over the chair. Here, he said, draping it over her. The coat was heavy with his warmth and scent leather, tobacco, and something uniquely him. Try to sleep. Tomorrow will be hard enough. Savannah nodded, but as he turned to resume his seat, she found herself speaking without planning to. Isaac, I'm afraid to close my eyes. He studied her for a long moment, understanding in his gaze. Move over a bit, he said finally. When she did, he surprised her by sitting on the edge of the cot, his back against the wall. Rest your head, he instructed gently. I'll keep watch. Hesitantly, Savannah shifted until her head rested against his leg. It was scandalously improper. She'd never been this close to any man outside her family, yet there was nothing improper in Isaac's manner. His presence was reassuring, solid. My brothers used to chase away my nightmares when I was little, she whispered, before they left for the gold fields. Isaac's hand hesitantly came to rest on her hair, a comforting weight. Sleep now, he said softly. Nothing's going to harm you while I'm here. For the first time since witnessing the attack on her home, Savannah felt safe. Despite the pain in her shoulder and the grief in her heart, exhaustion overcame her. As she drifted into sleep, she was vaguely aware of Isaac humming a gentle tune above her, a lullaby perhaps, though not one she recognized. In all her 22 years, Savannah Moore had never slept beside a man. Yet that night, as the Wyoming wind howled outside the lined shack walls, She slept through till dawn with her head resting against a cowboy who asked for nothing in return for his protection. Morning came with golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Savannah woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the warm presence beside her. Isaac had remained sitting upright all night, his hand still resting protectively on her hair. She shifted carefully, and his eyes opened immediately, alert despite his uncomfortable night's rest. "How's the shoulder?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. Savannah moved it experimentally, wincing. "Painful, but better than yesterday." Isaac nodded, rising stiffly to check on the fire. "We should change that bandage before we ride." As he heated water and prepared fresh bandages, Savannah took stock of her situation more clearly than she had been able to the night before. Her dress was torn and blood-stained, completely ruined. She had no possessions beyond what she wore, no money, and a bullet wound that made her vulnerable and dependent on a man she barely knew. "I have nothing to offer you for your help," she said finally, as Isaac knelt beside her to examine her wound. "Not even money to pay for supplies." His fingers were gentle as he removed the old bandage. "I'm not looking for payment." "Everyone wants something," she countered, wincing as he cleaned around the stitches. Isaac paused, meeting her eyes directly. "What I want is to see Hargrove's men face justice for what they did. If getting you safely to your aunt's helps make that happen, that's payment enough." There was a directness in his gaze that made it difficult to doubt him, though Savannah had learned the hard way that men rarely did anything without self-interest. Still, she had little choice but to trust him for now. "The wound's healing clean," he said, applying a fresh bandage, "but you'll need a sling to keep it still during the ride." He fashioned one from a spare shirt in his saddlebag, then helped her to her feet. Savannah swayed slightly, lightheaded from blood loss and hunger. "When did you last eat?" Isaac asked, steadying her with a hand on her good arm. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. He nodded, reaching for his saddlebag again. "Not much here, but it'll keep you going." He offered jerky and hardtack trail food, unappetizing but nourishing. As Savannah ate, Isaac outlined their route to prosperity. "We'll need to avoid the main trails where Hargrove's men might be watching. It'll make the journey longer but safer." "How well do you know this territory?" she asked between bites. "Well enough. Worked a cattle drive-through here last spring." He glanced out the window, assessing the weather. "We'll need supplies. There's a trading post about half a day's ride north run by an old trapper who doesn't ask questions. And if Hargrove's men find us before we reach my aunt's," Isaac's expression hardened. "I've dealt with men like them before." His hand briefly touched the Colt at his hip. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that." They set out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, Savannah riding double with Isaac on Merlin. The stallion was strong enough to carry them both, though Isaac kept their pace measured to avoid jostling Savannah's wound unnecessarily. She sat in front of him, his arms around her to hold the reins, his solid presence at her back a comfort she was reluctant to acknowledge. The vast Wyoming landscape stretched before them, rolling plains giving way to distant mountains, the morning air crisp and clean. "Beautiful country," Isaac commented as they rode. "Can see why your father chose to settle here." "He came for the solitude," Savannah replied, memories washing over her. "Said there were too many people back east, too many rules. He wanted a place where a man could breathe." "Sounds like a man who knew his own mind." "He was stubborn," she said with a sad smile. "My brothers got their wanderlust from him. I'm the only one who inherited his stubbornness." "I noticed," Isaac said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythmic movement of the horse lulling Savannah despite her pain. Isaac kept them away from the main trails, following creek beds and game trails instead. By midday, they'd covered significant ground, though Savannah was flagging, the pain in her shoulder growing more intense. "We'll rest here," Isaac decided, stopping in a sheltered ravine where a small spring provided fresh water. He helped her dismount carefully, supporting her weight when her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. "I'm fine," she insisted, though she leaned against him more heavily than she intended. "Of course you are," he agreed, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips as he helped her sit in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "Just humor me by resting anyway." As Isaac watered Merlin, Savannah studied him more carefully. He moved with an easy grace that belied his size, every action efficient and purposeful. Though his clothing was trail-worn faded denims, chambray shirt, scuffed boots, there was nothing slovenly about him. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, but his green eyes were clear and observant, missing nothing. He caught her watching and raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Just trying to figure you out," she admitted. "Not much to figure," he replied, settling beside her and offering his canteen. "What you see is what you get." "I doubt that," Savannah said after taking a drink. "Men who live by themselves on the frontier usually have reasons." Isaac was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Maybe so." "You don't talk much about yourself." "Neither do you," he countered. Savannah shrugged her good shoulder. "Not much to tell. I've spent my whole life on that ranch, never even been to Cheyenne. And now you're headed to prosperity." "Not exactly the grand adventure I might have imagined," she said with a touch of bitterness. Isaac studied her face. "What would you have imagined, if you could choose any adventure?" The question caught her off guard. For so long her life had been defined by duty to her father, to the ranch. Dreams had seemed pointless luxuries. "I always wanted to see the ocean," she admitted finally. "Father came west from Boston. He used to tell stories about ships and harbors and the endless blue of the Atlantic. It sounded free." Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It is. Saw it once myself, years ago, nothing quite like it." "Maybe someday," she said, though she didn't believe it. Her future, if she survived to reach prosperity, would likely be as constrained as her past. "Why not?" Isaac asked, surprising her. "Once Hargrove's men are brought to justice, what's stopping you?" "Reality," she replied simply. "I have no money, no skills beyond ranching, and nowhere to go." "The West is full of people who started with less," he observed. "Including me." Before she could respond, Isaac stiffened, his hand moving to his gun. "Someone's coming. Stay down." He moved swiftly to a position where he could see up the ravine without being spotted, drawing his Colt. Savannah pressed herself against the trunk of the cottonwood, heart pounding. After a tense moment, Isaac relaxed slightly. Single rider, not moving like he's tracking anyone. Soon, Savannah could hear the approaching hoofbeats. A weathered man on a mule appeared, his surprised expression indicating he hadn't expected to encounter anyone in the ravine. "Morning," the newcomer called cautiously, noting Isaac's drawn weapon. "Don't mean no trouble." "None offered," Isaac replied, lowering his gun but remaining alert. "Just passing through." The man, elderly with a long white beard, nodded. His gaze shifted to Savannah, taking in her sling and the bloodstains on her dress. "Looks like you've had some trouble yourselves." "Had a disagreement with some of William Hargrove's men," Isaac said, watching the man's reaction carefully. The old man spat to one side. "Hargrove. That explains it. Man's been pushing folks off their land all over the territory." "You know him?" Savannah asked. "Know enough to steer clear," the old man replied. "Name's Silas Perkins. Got a small claim up in the foothills. Hargrove's boys paid me a visit last month, but I convinced them my land wasn't worth the trouble." He patted a shotgun secured to his saddle. Isaac relaxed further, apparently deciding the old man posed no threat. "Isaac Turner. This is Savannah Moore." Recognition flashed in Silas's eyes. "Moore. From Silver Creek." When Savannah nodded, he shook his head sadly. "Heard about the fire. Word travels fast, even out here. They're saying it was an accident." "It wasn't," Savannah said firmly. "They murdered my father and tried to kill me too." Silas dismounted stiffly. "Figured as much. Hargrove's been after that water rights for months." He approached, offering a gnarled hand to Isaac. "Where you folks headed?" "Prosperity," Isaac replied after a moment's hesitation. "Miss Moore has family there." Silas nodded thoughtfully. "Good choice. Out of Hargrove's usual territory." He hesitated. "You should know, though there's talk in the hills. Hargrove's offering a reward for information about a woman who went missing after the Moore fire, claiming she's confused, dangerous." Savannah's stomach clenched. "They're hunting me." "Appears so," Silas confirmed. "Most decent folk don't believe his story, but there's always those who'll do anything for money." Isaac's expression hardened. "Any idea how many men he's got looking?" "At least 6 from what I heard in Peterson's trading post yesterday." Silas stroked his beard. "They're watching the trails to Laramie and Cheyenne." "We're avoiding the main routes," Isaac said. Silas nodded approvingly. "Smart, but there's a safer way still." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a crumpled map. "I've been prospecting these hills for 20 years. No paths most folks don't." He spread the map on a flat rock, pointing out a route that wound through the foothills. "Takes you well clear of anywhere Hargrove's men would think to look. Adds a day to your journey, but better that than lead in your backs." Isaac studied the map carefully before looking at Savannah. "It's your call. Longer journey means more strain on that shoulder." "I'd rather face pain than Hargrove's men," she said firmly. Silas nodded, seemingly impressed by her resolve. "Take the map. I know these hills by heart anyway." He hesitated. "Got some supplies too if you need them. Not much, but might help." Isaac's pride visibly warred with practicality before he nodded. "Much obliged." From his packhorse, Silas produced a small bundle coffee, jerky, bandages, and a worn but clean dress. "Wife passed 2 winters ago. No use to her now, might fit the young lady well enough." Savannah blinked back unexpected tears at the old man's kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Just Silas, miss, and it's nothing." He remounted his mule. "One more thing, there's an old mining cabin marked on that map. Good place to shelter tonight. Hidden in a stand of pines, easy to defend if needed." As he prepared to depart, Silas fixed Isaac with a penetrating look. "Take care of her, young man. Territory needs more folks willing to stand against men like Hargrove." "I intend to," Isaac replied solemnly. After Silas disappeared up the ravine, Isaac turned to Savannah. "What do you think? Can we trust him?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "My father always said you can tell a man's character by his eyes. His were kind." Isaac nodded, seemingly satisfied with her assessment. "Let's get moving then. We've got a lot of ground to cover before nightfall." With Silas's map guiding them, they traveled through increasingly rugged terrain, winding paths that cut through rocky foothills and dense stands of pine. The route was more difficult but offered excellent cover, with frequent vantage points where Isaac could ensure they weren't being followed. By late afternoon, Savannah was struggling. The pain in her shoulder had intensified, and exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. She swayed in the saddle, and Isaac's arm tightened around her waist. "Mining cabin's not far," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Hold on a little longer." "I'm fine," she insisted, though her voice was faint even to her own ears. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, but there was admiration mixed with the exasperation. The cabin appeared just as Silas had described, a small structure nestled in a grove of pines, with a creek running nearby. It was more substantial than the line shack, with a stone chimney and sturdy walls, though abandoned for years judging by the overgrown path. Isaac helped Savannah dismount and settled her on a fallen log while he checked the cabin. "All clear," he called after a moment. "Dusty but sound." Inside, the cabin consisted of a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a bed frame with ropes but no mattress. Isaac quickly cleared away cobwebs and lit a fire while Savannah sat heavily in one of the chairs, fighting waves of dizziness. "Let me check your wound," he said, kneeling before her. His fingers were gentle as he removed the bandage, but his expression grew concerned. "It's warmer than it should be. Might be the start of infection." Savannah closed her eyes briefly. She'd seen infections claim lives on neighboring homesteads, slow, agonizing deaths when no doctor was available. "How bad?" "Early stages," Isaac reassured her. "We caught it in time." He reached for his saddlebag, producing a small tin. "Willow bark helps with fever and pain. I'll make a tea." While the tea steeped, Isaac carefully cleaned her wound again, his touch so gentle she could hardly believe those same hands could wield a gun with deadly accuracy or control a powerful horse with minimal effort. "You're good at this," she observed. "Had practice," he replied, concentrating on his task. "Spent a winter with a Cheyenne healer once. Man could pull a man back from death's door with plants most folks would walk right past." "How did that happen?" A shadow crossed Isaac's face. "Long story, not all of it pleasant." She sensed the boundary and respected it, falling silent as he finished tending her wound. The willow bark tea was bitter but brought some relief, easing both the pain and the feverish feeling that had been growing throughout the afternoon. "You should rest," Isaac said as the daylight began to fade. "I'll see to Merlin and gather more firewood." Alone in the cabin, Savannah changed into the dress Silas had given her, struggling with the buttons but determined to manage on her own. The garment was simple, a faded blue cotton with a modest neckline and long sleeves, but clean and whole, unlike her ruined one. By the time Isaac returned with an armful of firewood, she was sitting before the fire, her damp hair loose around her shoulders where she'd washed it with water from the creek. He paused in the doorway, something indefinable crossing his expression before he set the wood beside the hearth. "Dress fits well enough," he observed, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes," she agreed, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "I'm grateful for Silas's kindness." Isaac nodded, busying himself with the fire. "Found some wild onions and a rabbit while I was out. Not much of a meal, but better than jerky again." As he prepared their simple supper, Savannah watched him work, struck by how domestic the scene felt, as if they were any settler couple in their cabin rather than 2 strangers thrown together by violence and necessity. The thought should have disturbed her more than it did. They ate in companionable silence, the rabbit stew surprisingly flavorful despite its simple ingredients. Afterward, Isaac cleaned their tin plates in the creek, while Savannah made up pallets before the fire, one from the blanket Isaac carried in his bedroll, the other from her ruined dress laid over pine boughs he'd gathered. "You take the bedroll," Isaac said when he returned. "I've slept on worse than pine needles." "You've already given up enough sleep watching over me," she protested. His expression softened slightly. "Savannah, you've been shot, you're fighting infection, and you've ridden hard all day. Take the bedroll." The use of her name, the first time he'd addressed her, so directly silenced her objections. She nodded, lowering herself carefully onto the blanket. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light throughout the cabin as night descended outside. Isaac checked his gun before setting it within easy reach, then stretched out on the improvised pallet, his tall frame barely accommodated by its length. "Isaac," Savannah said softly after several minutes of silence. Thank you for everything." He turned his head to look at her, firelight playing across his features. "Get some sleep, Savannah." But sleep proved elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, Savannah saw flames, heard gunshots, relived the terror of that night. Her shoulder throbbed despite the willow bark tea, and she shifted restlessly, trying to find a comfortable position. "Can't sleep?" Isaac asked after her third attempt to reposition herself. "Every time I close my eyes." She began, then stopped, unwilling to burden him with her fears. "I know," he said simply, and somehow she believed he truly did. The cabin grew colder as the night deepened, the fire burning low. Savannah shivered despite the blanket, her body's weakened state making her more susceptible to the mountain chill. Without a word, Isaac rose and added wood to the fire. Instead of returning to his pallet, however, he settled beside her, his back against the wall just as he had in the lined shack. "What are you doing?" she asked, though she already knew. "Keeping watch," he replied. "Like last night." The impropriety of it should have bothered her. Instead, Savannah found herself shifting closer, drawn to his warmth and the sense of security his presence provided. "Is this acceptable?" she asked hesitantly, her head once again coming to rest against his leg. In answer, Isaac gently tucked the blanket more securely around her. "Sleep now," he said softly. "I've got you." And so, for the second night in her life, Savannah Moore slept beside a cowboy who held her through the darkness without asking for anything in return. This time, though, something had changed. The desperate gratitude of the previous night had transformed into something warmer, more complex, and infinitely more frightening. As she drifted towards sleep, Savannah realized she was no longer afraid of the man beside her. Now, she was afraid of what she was beginning to feel for him. Dawn broke with pale golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Savannah woke to find herself curled against Isaac's side, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. During the night, he must have shifted to a more comfortable position, and she had instinctively sought his warmth. For a moment, she remained still, aware of the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek, the unfamiliar but not unpleasant scent of him leather, wood smoke, and clean sweat. She should move away, restore the proper distance between them, but her body refused to obey. Isaac stirred, his arm tightening briefly around her before he came fully awake. When he realized their position, he carefully withdrew his arm, giving her space to sit up. "How's the shoulder?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. Savannah moved it experimentally. "Better, I think. The fever's down." Relief crossed his features. "Good. We've got another long day ahead." They shared a breakfast of coffee and the last of the jerky before breaking camp. As Isaac saddled Merlin, Savannah stood at the cabin door, gazing at the mountains rising to the west. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay prosperity and safety. It seemed both impossibly far and alarmingly close. Each mile brought her nearer to security, but also to the moment when she would no longer need Isaac's protection. The thought troubled her more than it should have. "Ready?" Isaac asked, leading Merlin to the cabin. Savannah nodded, allowing him to help her mount. As they set off along the trail Silas had mapped, she found herself more aware than ever of Isaac's presence behind her, the solid strength of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. They rode in companionable silence for much of the morning, the terrain growing steadily more rugged as they climbed into the foothills of the Medicine Bow Mountains. Isaac kept them moving at a steady pace, always alert for signs of pursuit or danger. "Tell me about your aunt," he said eventually, breaking the silence. "The one in Prosperity." "Aunt Ida," Savannah replied, grateful for the distraction from her confusing thoughts. "My mother's sister. She came west after her husband died in the war." Started a boarding house in Prosperity when the settlement was just a few cabins around a silver strike. You've visited her before. Once, when I was 12. Mother was still alive then. Memories washed over her the long journey by wagon, her excitement at seeing a real town, however small. Aunt Ida is formidable. Nothing like my mother, who was gentle and soft-spoken. Ida believes women should make their own way in the world, not depend on men. Isaac chuckled. Sounds like someone I'd get along with. She'd approve of you helping me, Savannah admitted. Though she'd probably warn me not to get too comfortable with male assistants. Wise woman, Isaac commented, and Savannah was grateful he couldn't see her blush. Around midday, they stopped at a stream to rest and water Merlin. Isaac helped Savannah dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. How much farther? She asked, stretching carefully to ease the stiffness in her back. Isaac consulted Silas's map. If we keep this pace, we should reach Prosperity by tomorrow afternoon. He glanced at her. How are you holding up? I'm fine, she replied automatically. He raised an eyebrow. The truth, Savannah, she sighed, relenting under his steady gaze. Sore, tired, but determined to keep going. Isaac nodded, seeming to approve of her honesty. We'll rest here a bit longer. No sign of pursuit, and Merlin could use the break. As he checked the stallion's hooves and adjusted the saddle, Savannah watched him work, struck again by the careful competence in everything he did. In just 2 days, she'd come to trust this man with her life, a man who was still largely a mystery to her. Why are you really helping me? She asked suddenly. Isaac looked up, surprise crossing his features. I told you why. You said you want to see Hargrove's men face justice. But there are easier ways to do that than escorting an injured woman across dangerous territory. He straightened, considering her for a long moment. Maybe I've seen too many people like Hargrove get away with taking what isn't theirs. His voice was quiet but intense. Maybe I'm tired of riding away when I could stand and fight instead. Is that why you left your deputy position? Because someone got away with something they shouldn't have? A shadow crossed his face. Something like that. Savannah sensed there was much more, but before she could press further, Isaac's posture changed, tension suddenly evident in his shoulders. Get down, he said quietly, his hand moving to his gun. Savannah dropped to a crouch without question, her heart racing. What is it, riders? Coming up the valley. Isaac moved swiftly to Merlin, keeping low. 3 of them, moving fast. Could be coincidence, but I don't like coincidences. He led the horse behind a large boulder, gesturing for Savannah to follow. From their position, they could see the approaching riders without being spotted. 3 men on horseback following the stream, their manner suggesting purpose rather than casual travel. Hargrove's men, Savannah whispered. Isaac's expression was grim. Maybe. They're armed, that's certain. As the riders drew closer, Savannah's breath caught. The one on the left, that's Sam Wheeler. He works for Hargrove. He was there the night. Her voice failed her. Isaac's jaw tightened. You're sure? She nodded, fighting back the wave of panic threatening to overwhelm her. Positive. They haven't seen us yet. Isaac assessed their options quickly. We can't outrun them, not 3 of them, not with you injured and us on 1 horse. So what do we do? His green eyes met hers, steady and determined. We set an ambush. The plan came together quickly. Isaac positioned Savannah with his rifle behind the boulder, where she had a clear view of the approach, but would be protected if shooting started. He took Merlin and circled back, planning to come up behind the riders once they passed. Remember, he told her before leaving, only shoot if they spot you first. Otherwise, wait for my move. Savannah nodded, her hand steady on the rifle despite her fear. The weight of it was familiar. She'd learned to shoot years ago, a necessity on a frontier homestead. The minutes crawled by as she waited, watching the three men approach. They were scanning the terrain as they rode, clearly searching for something or someone. When they were about 50 yards away, one of them pointed to tracks in the mud by the stream Merlin's hoofprints where they'd stopped to water him. "Looks fresh," one called to the others. "Can't be more than an hour old." Wheeler nodded, spurring his horse forward. "Spread out. Check for any sign of camp." The men dismounted, tying their horses to a nearby tree before separating to search the area. Wheeler moved in Savannah's direction, his hand resting on his holstered gun. She held her breath, pressing herself against the rock, the rifle ready. Wheeler was less than 20 feet away when a sharp whistle cut through the air. All three men whirled toward the sound. Isaac sat atop Merlin on a rise behind them, his Colt drawn and aimed. "That's far enough," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. Wheeler recovered first. "We're just passing through, mister. No quarrel with you." "Is that so?" Isaac replied. "Strange place to be just passing through, especially for men working for William Hargrove." The men exchanged glances, their hands hovering near their weapons. "You've got us at a disadvantage," Wheeler said carefully. "And I intend to keep it that way," Isaac answered. "Drop your gun belts, all of you." Wheeler's eyes narrowed. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you. Bad odds." "Actually," Savannah called, stepping partially into view with the rifle aimed, "the odds don't favor you at all." Wheeler's expression changed to one of shock and then rage when he recognized her. "Well, well. The Moore girl. Hargrove said you might have survived." "Back away from your horses," Isaac ordered. "Slowly." For a tense moment, it seemed Wheeler might try something foolish. Then, with visible reluctance, he gestured to his companions to comply. All 3 stepped away from their mounts. "Now the gun belts," Isaac repeated, guiding Merlin closer while keeping his weapon trained on them. When all 3 had unbuckled their weapons and dropped them to the ground, Isaac dismounted, keeping his Colt ready. "Savannah, keep the rifle on them." She stepped fully into view now, the rifle steady in her hands despite the pain in her shoulder. Isaac collected the men's guns, emptying the chambers before tossing them into the stream. "You're making a mistake," Wheeler snarled. "Hargrove will hunt you both down for this." "He's already hunting us," Isaac replied coolly. "Now we're going to have a little talk about what happened at the Moore ranch." Wheeler spat on the ground. "Nothing to talk about. Old man had an accident with his lantern. Tragic, really." Fury surged through Savannah. "You murdered him." "I saw you shoot him down in cold blood." "Prove it," Wheeler sneered. "Your word against ours. And Hargrove owns the law in these parts." "Not all of it," Isaac said, his voice deadly calm. "And not where we're going." He bound the men's hands with rope from his saddlebags, then secured them to a tree far enough from their horses that escape would be difficult, though not impossible given enough time. "You can't just leave us here," one of the men protested. "I could put bullets in you instead," Isaac suggested conversationally. "Like you did to John Moore." The men fell silent, fear finally registering in their eyes. "Someone will find you," Isaac continued. "Eventually, unless the bears get curious first." He mounted Merlin, extending a hand to help Savannah up behind him. "By then, we'll be long gone." "This isn't over," Wheeler called as they rode away. "Hargrove has men all over the territory." Isaac didn't bother to respond, guiding Merlin up a steep trail that would take them higher into the mountains and away from the valley. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and the bound men. Finally, in a sheltered grove, Isaac stopped to let Merlin rest. "You were bluffing," Savannah said as he helped her down. "About the bears." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe, but they don't know that. They'll get free eventually." "Yes," he agreed. But it'll take them hours, and by then, they'll be more concerned with getting back to civilization than continuing to track us. Savannah leaned against a tree, suddenly exhausted now that the danger had passed. What if there are others, more of Hargrove's men? There probably are, Isaac admitted. But we're close to prosperity now. Another day's ride at most. She nodded, trying to take comfort in that fact. Instead, she found herself troubled by the realization that reaching safety also meant parting ways with Isaac. The thought left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. "We should keep moving," she said, pushing away from the tree, "while we still have daylight." Isaac studied her face, seeming to sense the shift in her mood. "Savannah, I'm fine," she interrupted, not wanting to hear whatever he was about to say. "Really? Let's go." They rode until dusk, following Silas's map through increasingly rugged mountain terrain. The air grew cooler as they climbed, the pine forests thicker. By the time darkness made further travel too dangerous, they had reached a high plateau with a sweeping view of the valley below. "We'll camp here," Isaac decided, helping Savannah dismount. Too risky to continue in the dark, even with the moon. He built a small, sheltered fire, careful to keep it low enough not to be visible from a distance. While he prepared a simple meal from their dwindling supplies, Savannah sat with her back against a fallen log, gazing at the stars emerging in the vast Wyoming sky. "My father used to say the stars are clearer in the west than anywhere else on earth," she said softly as Isaac joined her, offering a tin cup of coffee. "That's why he came here, to be closer to heaven." "Wise man," Isaac commented, settling beside her. "What would he think of all this?" Savannah considered the question. He'd be furious about Hargrove, determined to fight. She smiled sadly. "But he'd approve of you. He always said you can judge a man by how he treats those weaker than himself." "You're not weak, Savannah," Isaac said quietly. She glanced at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "I'm not strong like you. There are different kinds of strength." His gaze held hers. "It takes courage to keep going after what you've been through. Many would have broken." The sincerity in his words warmed her more than the fire. They sat in companionable silence, watching the moon rise over the distant peaks. "What will you do?" Savannah asked eventually. "After you've delivered me to prosperity?" Isaac took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Haven't thought that far ahead." "You could stay," she suggested, then immediately regretted the words. They sounded too eager, too revealing of feelings she was only beginning to understand herself. His expression was unreadable in the firelight. "Prosperity need a deputy?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But they might need a man who stands up for what's right." Isaac was quiet for so long that Savannah feared she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and reflective. "Been drifting a long time. Never stayed anywhere longer than a season or two. Why not?" He stared into the fire. "Easier to leave than to watch things fall apart. Easier to be alone than to lose people you care about." The simple honesty of his answer touched something deep within her. "Is it really easier, being alone?" Isaac's eyes met hers across the flames. "No," he said softly. "Just safer." In that moment, Savannah understood him better than she had in all their time together. This man, so capable and strong, carried wounds deeper than any bullet could cause, wounds that had taught him to keep his distance, to avoid connections that might bring pain. Yet here he was, risking his life for a woman he barely knew, showing a gentleness and consideration that belied his hardened exterior. As the fire burned low, exhaustion claimed them both. Without discussion, Isaac spread his bedroll near the dying embers, and Savannah settled beside him, closer than propriety would allow but seeking the comfort of his warmth in the mountain chill. When he hesitantly placed his arm around her, drawing her against his side, she made no protest. Instead, she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling safer than she had any right to feel with danger still pursuing them. "Isaac," she whispered, sleep already tugging at her consciousness. "Hum?" His voice was a deep rumble beneath her ear. "Thank you for everything." His arm tightened slightly around her. "Sleep now," he murmured. "We've got a long day tomorrow." As Savannah drifted into slumber, held securely in the arms of a man who asked for nothing in return for his protection, she realized how completely her life had changed in just 3 days. The predictable existence she had known was gone forever, replaced by uncertainty, danger, and the stirrings of feelings she had never expected to experience. Morning brought mist rolling through the pines, and the promise of a clear day ahead. They broke camp quickly, eager to cover the remaining distance to prosperity. According to Silas's map, they would reach the settlement by late afternoon if they maintained a steady pace. The trail wound through stunning mountain scenery, towering pines, rushing streams, and occasional meadows bright with wildflowers. Under different circumstances, Savannah might have found it breathtaking. Now, she was acutely aware of every sound, every movement in the forest around them, her nerves strung tight with the knowledge that safety was tantalizingly close yet still beyond reach. Isaac was equally vigilant, his posture tense as he guided Merlin along the narrow trail. They spoke little, conserving energy and remaining alert for any sign of pursuit. By midday, they had begun the descent toward the valley where prosperity lay nestled at the base of the mountains. From a high ridge, Savannah caught her first glimpse of the settlement larger than she remembered from her childhood visit, with perhaps 24 buildings clustered around a main street, smoke rising from chimneys, and the glint of a small river winding alongside the town. "There it is," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Prosperity." Isaac nodded, though his expression remained watchful. "We're not there yet. Steepest part of the trail is ahead." The descent proved challenging. The path narrowed in places to barely the width of Merlin's hooves, with sheer drops to one side that made Savannah's stomach lurch. Isaac handled the difficult terrain with characteristic skill, but even he was forced to dismount and lead Merlin through the most treacherous sections. They were halfway down when disaster struck. A section of trail, weakened by recent rains, gave way beneath Merlin's hooves. The stallion whinnied in alarm, scrambling for purchase as the edge crumbled. Isaac reacted instantly, pulling hard on the reins to guide the horse back to solid ground, but the sudden movement dislodged Savannah from her precarious seat. She fell with a cry of surprise, tumbling down the steep slope amid a shower of loose rocks and dirt. Pain exploded in her injured shoulder as she rolled, unable to stop her descent until a thicket of undergrowth finally halted her momentum. "Savannah!" Isaac's voice reached her through a haze of pain and disorientation. She tried to sit up, gasping as fresh agony tore through her shoulder. Looking down, she saw blood seeping through the bandage. The fall had reopened her wound. Above her on the trail, Isaac secured Merlin to a tree before carefully making his way down the slope toward her, using saplings and rocks for handholds. "Don't move," he called. "I'm coming." When he reached her side, his expression was taut with concern. "How bad?" Shoulders bleeding again, she managed through gritted teeth. "Nothing else broken, I think." Isaac gently examined her, his touch careful but thorough. "You're right, just bruises and the reopened wound." He glanced up the steep slope they would need to climb to regain the trail. "Can you stand?" With his help, Savannah got to her feet, swaying slightly. The world spun alarmingly for a moment before steadying again. "I can make it." Isaac looked unconvinced but nodded. "Lean on me. Small steps." The climb back to the trail was excruciating. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through Savannah's shoulder, and by the time they reached Merlin, she was pale and trembling with exertion. Isaac rebandaged her wound as best he could with their limited supplies, his face grim. "We need to get you to town. That needs proper tending." "I can ride," Savannah insisted, though the prospect of mounting the horse again seemed almost impossible. Isaac studied her face for a long moment before making a decision. "We'll continue on foot. I'll lead Merlin. The trail's too dangerous to risk another fall." Walking proved marginally less painful than riding would have been, though each step jolted Savannah's shoulder. Isaac matched his pace to hers, one hand steadying her elbow, the other leading Merlin. The going was slow, but gradually the trail widened and became less treacherous as they continued their descent toward the valley. By late afternoon, they had reached the foothills, with Prosperity visible in the near distance. Savannah's strength was failing, her steps becoming increasingly unsteady. Without comment, Isaac lifted her onto Merlin's back, then mounted behind her, supporting her weight against his chest. "Almost there," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "Just hold on a little longer." The first buildings of Prosperity came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Unlike many frontier settlements, which often appeared haphazard and temporary, Prosperity had a sense of permanent solid structures built of local timber and stone, a proper church with a small steeple, and streets laid out in an orderly grid. As they rode down the main street, curious townspeople paused in their activities to watch them pass. Savannah, barely conscious now from pain and exhaustion, was aware only of Isaac's solid presence behind her and the murmur of voices around them. "Looking for Ida Raymond's boarding house," she heard Isaac say to someone. "This lady is her niece, Savannah Moore." "3 buildings down on the right," came the reply. "The blue one with the white trim. I'll fetch Doc Harper." The world faded in and out as Isaac guided Merlin to the boarding house. Savannah had vague impressions of a wide porch, a door opening, a woman's shocked exclamation, and then hands helping her down from the horse. "Savannah, child, what's happened to you?" The familiar voice penetrated the fog in her mind. "Aunt Ida," she managed before the last of her strength deserted her, and darkness claimed her completely. Savannah woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains, and the unfamiliar sensation of a soft mattress beneath her. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then memory flooded back in a rush. Her father's murder, the desperate flight across Wyoming, Isaac. She tried to sit up, gasping as pain shot through her shoulder. A hand gently pressed her back against the pillows. "Easy now. You'll tear those stitches again." Savannah turned her head to find her aunt sitting beside the bed, a tall, angular woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Despite her stern appearance, Ida Raymond's eyes were kind as they assessed her niece. "Aunt Ida," Savannah said, her voice hoarse. "How long have I been asleep?" "Nearly a day and a half," Ida replied, offering a glass of water. "Dr. Harper said it was exhaustion as much as the wound. You needed the rest." Savannah drank gratefully, then looked around the unfamiliar room, simply but comfortably furnished, with floral wallpaper and polished wooden floors. "We made it to Prosperity." "Thanks to that cowboy of yours," Ida confirmed. "Brought you in half dead, covered in blood, yours and his both." Alarm shot through Savannah. Isaac was hurt. How? When? Ida's eyebrows rose at her vehement reaction. "Nothing serious. Cut his arm during your fall," he said. "Refused to let Doc Harper see to it until you were taken care of." Relief washed over Savannah, followed immediately by concern. "Where is he now?" A knowing look crossed Ida's face. "Interesting that's your first question. He's downstairs, I expect. Hasn't left the house since bringing you here, despite my offering him a proper room at normal rates." "He saved my life, Aunt Ida," Savannah said quietly. "Several times over." So he explained, once he determined I was truly your aunt and not some impostor. Ida sniffed, though approval lurked beneath her stern exterior. "Gave me the whole tale, Hargrove, your father's murder, the journey here. Man's as protective as a mother bear with her cubs." Savannah felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication in her aunt's tone. "It's not like that. He was just helping me." Ida responded noncommittally. "Well, whatever his reasons, he's been pacing the parlor like a caged wolf waiting for you to wake. Nearly wore a path in my good carpet." Before Savannah could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Ida rose to answer it, revealing a distinguished older man with spectacles and a medical bag. "Ah, our patient is awake," he said, entering the room with a professional smile. "I'm Dr. Harper, Miss Moore. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Savannah replied automatically, though in truth her shoulder throbbed painfully. The doctor's examination was thorough but gentle. He seemed pleased with what he found, nodding as he rebandaged the wound. "Healing nicely, despite the reopening." Whoever initially treated this knew what they were doing. "Isaac," Savannah said. "He stitched it the first night." "Steady hands," Dr. Harper commented. "The infection's responding well to the poultice I applied yesterday. Another week of rest and you should be able to resume light activities." He patted her hand. "You're a fortunate young woman, Miss Moore. That bullet could have done much worse damage." After the doctor departed, Ida helped Savannah into a clean nightgown. "Your cowboy insisted on bringing your things up from his saddlebags himself," she explained when Savannah expressed surprise at having a change of clothes. "Said they were gifts from someone named Silas." Savannah smiled faintly, remembering the old prospector's kindness. "We met him on the trail. He helped us avoid Hargrove's men." Once she was settled back against the pillows, Ida regarded her with shrewd eyes. "Now, would you like to see your protector? He's been asking after you every hour on the hour." Despite her weakness, Savannah felt her heart quicken at the prospect. "Yes, please." Ida's expression softened unexpectedly. "He's a good man, your Isaac Turner. Not many would risk what he did for a stranger." She paused at the door. "Your father would have approved." Left alone, Savannah smoothed the bedcovers with trembling hands, suddenly conscious of her appearance after days on the trail. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her face pale from blood loss and exhaustion. She wished for a mirror, then immediately chided herself for such vanity after everything that had happened. The sound of footsteps on the stairs sent her heart racing again. There was a brief pause outside her door, then a gentle knock. "Come in," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened, and Isaac stood on the threshold cleaner than she'd yet seen him, freshly shaven, his dark hair still damp from washing. He'd acquired a new shirt somewhere, the blue cotton setting off his tanned skin and green eyes. For a moment they simply looked at each other, a wealth of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. "You're awake," he said finally, his deep voice warming something inside her. "Thanks to you," she replied. He entered the room, closing the door softly behind him, and approached the bed with an almost hesitant step so different from the confident stride she'd grown accustomed to. "How's the shoulder?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance from the bed. "Healing," she said. "Doctor Harper says you did good work with those first stitches." A brief smile touched his lips. "Learned from necessity, not choice." His gaze swept over her, as if assuring himself she was truly on the mend. "You had me worried." "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for. Isaac shook his head. "Don't be. You're stronger than most men I've known, Savannah Moore." The simple sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to appear weak now after everything. "Aunt Ida says you were hurt too. Your arm." He glanced down at the bandage visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. "Just a scratch. Nothing compared to what you've been through." An awkward silence fell between them, the first since they'd met. In the safety of prosperity, with the immediate danger past, neither seemed to know quite how to proceed. "Your aunt is quite a woman," Isaac said finally, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Questioned me for an hour before deciding I wasn't some nefarious character who'd kidnapped her niece." Savannah smiled, imagining the scene. "That sounds like Aunt Ida. She doesn't trust easily. A trait that serves well out here." He paused, shifting his weight slightly. "She's offered me work. Repairing the roof of her stable, some other odd jobs around the boarding house." Hope flickered in Savannah's chest. "You're staying in prosperity then, for a while?" His eyes met hers. "At least until I know you're fully recovered, and until we deal with Hargrove." The mention of Hargrove brought reality crashing back. "Do you think he'll send men here? To prosperity?" "Eventually," Isaac acknowledged. "But we have time. Your aunt's already spoken to the town marshal, a man named Daniels. Seems he has no love for Hargrove either. Had some troubles with his men in the past." "Will that be enough? One marshal against Hargrove's forces?" Isaac's expression hardened. "It won't just be the marshal. I've already sent telegrams to the territorial governor and the federal marshal in Cheyenne. With a witness to John Moore's murder, they can't ignore Hargrove's actions any longer." Savannah hadn't considered that possibility, that the law might actually stand against Hargrove. In her experience, men with money and power like Hargrove typically operated above legal consequences. "You think they'll actually do something?" she asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. "I know the federal marshal," Isaac replied. "Worked with him years ago. He's been building a case against Hargrove for land fraud and intimidation. Your testimony could be what finally brings him down." Hope and trepidation warred within her. "I'll testify, whatever it takes." Isaac nodded, approval in his gaze. "I never doubted it." He glanced toward the window, where afternoon light was beginning to fade. "I should let you rest." As he turned to leave, Savannah found herself speaking without planning to. "Isaac," he paused, looking back at her, "would you stay, just for a little while?" The request felt vulnerable, exposing feelings she was only beginning to understand. Something softened in his expression. "Of course." He settled into the chair Ida had vacated, close enough that Savannah could reach out and touch him if she dared. Neither spoke for several minutes, the silence between them comfortable now rather than awkward. "I've been thinking," Savannah said eventually, "about what happens after. After Hargrove, I mean." Isaac's gaze was steady. "What do you want to happen?" It was a simple question, yet one that opened possibilities Savannah had never allowed herself to consider. Before meeting Isaac, her future had seemed predetermined, caring for her father until his death, then facing spinsterhood alone on the ranch. Now everything had changed. "I don't know," she admitted. "The ranch is gone. My father's gone. For the first time in my life, I have no obligations to anyone." "That kind of freedom can be frightening," Isaac observed quietly. "Yes," she agreed, "but also exhilarating." She met his eyes directly. "What about you? What do you want, Isaac?" He was silent for so long that Savannah feared she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and reflective. "For years, all I've wanted was the next horizon. The next job, movement without purpose beyond staying ahead of my own thoughts." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent on her face. "I never expected to find someone that made me want to stop running." Savannah's breath caught at the implication in his words. "And have you found a reason to stop?" In answer, Isaac reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin, his touch gentle yet somehow more intimate than any embrace. "I think I might have," he said softly. The simple honesty in his words and the tenderness in his touch broke something open inside Savannah, a place she had kept carefully guarded, never expecting it to be claimed. Before she could respond, however, a knock at the door announced Ida's return with a tray of supper. Isaac released Savannah's hand and stood as Ida entered, though something in the older woman's knowing glance suggested she had witnessed at least part of their exchange. "Dr. Harper says you need nourishment," Ida announced briskly, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Chicken broth and fresh bread to start. If that stays down, we'll try something more substantial tomorrow." "Thank you, Aunt Ida," Savannah said, grateful for both the food and the interruption that gave her time to collect her thoughts. "Mr. Turner, I've set a place for you downstairs if you'd care to join me for supper," Ida continued. "Mrs. Peterson has brought over a venison stew that's worth writing home about." Isaac glanced at Savannah as if seeking her permission to leave. When she nodded, he turned to Ida. "Thank you, Mrs. Raymond. That's very kind. Least I can do for the man who saved my niece," Ida replied matter-of-factly. "Though I still say you should take a proper room instead of sleeping in that chair in the parlor. My rates are reasonable." "The chair suits me fine," Isaac said with a faint smile. "But I appreciate the offer." After they left, Savannah attempted to eat, though her appetite was diminished by the tumult of emotions Isaac's words had stirred within her. He had all but admitted developing feelings for her, feelings that mirrored her own growing attachment to him. Yet what could come of it? They barely knew each other, thrown together by violence and necessity. Once the danger from Hargrove was past, would those feelings persist? Or would Isaac's natural inclination toward wandering reassert itself? These questions circled in Savannah's mind as she drifted back to sleep, the broth only half finished on the tray beside her. The next week passed in a pattern of gradual healing. Each day, Savannah grew stronger, able to sit up for longer periods and eventually to move around her room with Ida's assistance. Dr. Harper visited daily, expressing satisfaction with her progress, and finally removing the stitches from her shoulder wound, leaving a puckered scar that would remain with her, always a permanent reminder of the night her life had changed forever. Isaac was a constant presence, though always appropriately chaperoned by Ida, whose stern exterior concealed a romantic heart that clearly approved of the developing connection between her niece and the cowboy. He spent his days working on the promised repairs to the boarding house, his evenings in Savannah's room, sharing supper and conversation that gradually revealed more of their respective pasts. She learned of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his brief service in the final months of the Civil War when he was barely 18, and his subsequent wanderings across the West. He spoke of his time as a deputy in a Colorado mining town, though he remained vague about why he'd left that position, and Savannah sensed the topic remained painful for him. In turn, she shared stories of her life on the ranch, the mother she'd lost to influenza when she was 16, the brothers who'd left for the goldfields and rarely wrote, the father who'd grown increasingly bitter and isolated in his final years. She spoke of dreams deferred, of seeing the ocean, of perhaps someday teaching in a proper school, of creating a life beyond the confines of the isolated ranch. Throughout their conversations, neither directly addressed the moment of connection they'd shared on her first day in prosperity, nor the feelings growing between them. Yet Savannah was acutely aware of Isaac's gaze lingering on her when he thought she wouldn't notice, just as she found her own eyes drawn to him whenever he entered a room. On the 8th day after their arrival, Marshal Daniels visited the boarding house, bringing news that the federal marshal would arrive from Cheyenne within the week to take Savannah's formal statement about her father's murder. "Word is Hargrove's getting nervous," Daniels informed them as they gathered in Savannah's room the first time she'd been deemed well enough for official visitors. "He's claiming the fire was an accident, that John Moore died trying to save his property." "That's a lie," Savannah said firmly. "I saw Wheeler shoot my father in cold blood, heard Hargrove give the order himself." Daniels nodded, his weathered face grave. "Your testimony will be crucial, Miss Moore, but I should warn you testifying against a man like Hargrove comes with risks. He's got friends in high places, money to buy influence." "She knows the risks," Isaac said, his posture tense where he stood by the window, "but she's not facing them alone." The marshal studied Isaac thoughtfully. "No, I don't suppose she is." He turned back to Savannah. "In the meantime, I'd advise staying close to the boarding house. Hargrove's men have been seen in the area, not in Prosperity itself, but in the surrounding countryside." After Daniels departed, Ida excused herself to prepare dinner, leaving Savannah and Isaac alone for the first time in days. An unusual tension filled the air between them. "Are you afraid?" Isaac asked finally, moving from the window to sit in the chair beside her bed. Savannah considered the question honestly. "Yes," she admitted, "but not enough to stay silent." "Good." Approval warmed his voice. "Fear keeps you alert. It's only dangerous when it paralyzes you." She studied his face, noting the new lines of worry around his eyes. "What about you? Are you afraid?" "Only of failing to protect you," he said simply. The directness of his answer touched her deeply. "You've already done more than anyone could expect, Isaac. Whatever happens with Hargrove, I'll never forget that." His expression grew serious. "Savannah, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have explained before now." The gravity in his tone alarmed her. "What is it?" Isaac leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, gaze fixed on his clasped hands rather than her face. "The reason I left my deputy position in Colorado, the reason I've been drifting these past 2 years." Savannah waited, sensing his need to share this burden at his own pace. "There was a woman," he began slowly. "Catherine Winters, daughter of a mine owner in Silver Peak, where I was deputy. She witnessed a murder, a prominent businessman killing his partner over a disputed claim." He paused, pain evident in his expression. "I promised to protect her until the circuit judge arrived to hear her testimony." A sense of foreboding settled over Savannah. What happened? The businessman had friends, powerful friends, who didn't want him to hang. They bribed the town marshal to look the other way. Isaac's voice grew tight with suppressed emotion. "I was escorting Catherine to the courthouse when they ambushed us. 3 men with shotguns. I killed 2, but—" He swallowed hard. "Catherine died in my arms on the courthouse steps." "Oh, Isaac," Savannah whispered, reaching for his hand. He took it, holding on as if it were a lifeline. "The businessman was never charged. The marshal claimed there wasn't sufficient evidence without Catherine's testimony. When I threatened to take what I knew to the territorial governor, I was advised to leave town quietly or face trumped-up charges myself." Understanding dawned on Savannah. "That's why you're so determined to help me against Hargrove. You see it as a chance to right a wrong from your past." Isaac met her gaze directly now. "At first, yes. When I found you wounded on the prairie, I saw a chance for redemption to protect a witness where I'd failed before." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "But it became something else, Savannah, something I wasn't looking for and didn't expect." The vulnerability in his eyes made her heart ache. "What did it become?" "A reason to stop running," he said softly. "A reason to believe in justice again, in possibilities." Savannah's throat tightened with emotion. "Isaac, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. I just needed you to understand why this matters so much to me. Why you matter. Before she could respond, the door opened as Ida returned with a dinner tray, effectively ending the moment of intimacy. Yet as they ate together, something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, a recognition of shared purpose that went beyond their initial chance encounter. That night, as Savannah prepared for sleep, she found herself standing at the window, gazing out at the moonlit street below. Prosperity slumbered peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding within its borders, a drama that would soon reach its climax with the arrival of the federal marshal and her testimony against Hargrove. The thought should have terrified her, yet she felt strangely calm. Whatever came next, she would face it with courage, not just for her father's memory or for justice, but for the future that now seemed possible. A future that, increasingly, she could only imagine with Isaac by her side. In that moment, Savannah realized she had fallen in love with the quiet cowboy who had held her through the night, without asking for more, the man who had saved not just her life, but her faith in human goodness when it might easily have been destroyed forever. 3 days later, word reached Prosperity that the federal marshal had been delayed by troubles in Cheyenne and wouldn't arrive for at least another week. The news brought mixed feelings: relief for the additional recovery time, anxiety about the prolonged waiting, and concern that Hargrove might learn of the delay and take advantage of it. I don't like it, Isaac said as they discussed the situation over breakfast in Ida's kitchen, Savannah's first meal downstairs since their arrival. Hargrove's had too much time already to cover his tracks. Marshal Daniels has men watching the trails into town, Ida reminded him, pouring more coffee. And you're here. My niece couldn't ask for better protection. Savannah, who had been quietly eating her eggs, looked up at this. I can't hide forever, though. Sooner or later, I need to reclaim my life. Isaac studied her across the table, noting the healthy color that had returned to her cheeks, the determination in her blue eyes. What are you suggesting? I want to go outside today, she declared. Just to the porch, perhaps a short walk down the street. I'm tired of feeling like a prisoner. Ida frowned. Is that wise with Hargrove's men in the area? They won't try anything in broad daylight in the middle of town, Savannah argued. And as you said, I have Isaac to protect me. She glanced at him. Unless you think I'm not strong enough yet. He recognized the challenge in her tone and smiled slightly. I think you're strong enough for anything you set your mind to, but I'll be right beside you just the same. The simple faith in his words warmed her more than the morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows. After breakfast, Isaac escorted Savannah onto the wide front porch of the boarding house. The June day was perfect, clear blue sky, gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains, the bustling sounds of Prosperity going about its daily business. Savannah drew a deep breath, savoring the fresh air after days confined to her room. It feels like years since I've been outside. Isaac watched her face, seeing the pleasure in her expression as she tilted her head back to feel the sun on her skin. How's the shoulder? Still sore, she admitted, but manageable. She glanced at him, a hint of mischief in her eyes. I think I could manage that walk I mentioned. He offered his arm with a slight bow. Your escort, madam. Savannah placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the cotton of his shirt. Together, they descended the steps and set off down Prosperity's main street at a leisurely pace. The town was larger than Savannah remembered from her childhood visit, perhaps 30 buildings now, including a general store, a smithy, 2 saloons, a small hotel besides Ida's boarding house, and various businesses serving the needs of the surrounding ranches and farms. People nodded respectfully as they passed, word of Savannah's ordeal having spread throughout the close-knit community. "It's a nice town," Isaac observed as they paused to allow Savannah to rest on a bench outside the general store. "Seems prosperous enough to live up to its name." "Aunt Ida says the silver mines played out years ago, but by then enough settlers had put down roots to keep the town going," Savannah replied. "Ranching, farming, some logging in the mountains. People help each other here." "The kind of place a person might want to settle," Isaac said, his tone carefully neutral. Savannah glanced at him, wondering at the meaning behind his words. Before she could respond, the storekeeper emerged, wiping his hands on his apron. "Miss Moore, good to see you up and about," he said warmly. "Mrs. Raymond said you were on the mend." "Thank you, Mr." Savannah began, realizing she didn't know his name. "Jenkins, Miss Samuel Jenkins." He nodded respectfully to Isaac. "Mr. Turner, I've got that order you placed yesterday ready for pickup whenever you'd like." Isaac thanked him, and after a brief exchange of pleasantries, they continued their walk. Savannah was curious about the order Jenkins had mentioned, but didn't ask, sensing Isaac would explain in his own time. They had nearly completed a circuit of the main street when Savannah felt her strength beginning to flag. Isaac noticed immediately, supporting more of her weight against his side. "Time to head back," he said, no judgment in his tone. "You've done well for your first outing." As they turned toward the boarding house, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming into town from the east, rough-looking men whose posture and manner immediately put Isaac on alert. "Inside," he said quietly, guiding Savannah toward the nearest building, a millinery shop. Now, they had just reached the door when one of the riders called out, "Turner, hold up there." Isaac turned slowly, positioning himself between Savannah and the riders. His hand hovered near his holstered Colt. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The lead rider, a heavy-set man with a week's growth of beard, dismounted with deliberate casualness. "Might be we can help each other. Name's Brennan. Work for William Hargrove." "I know who Hargrove is," Isaac replied, his voice level but cold. "Don't recall having any business with him." Brennan smiled unpleasantly. "You're harboring a fugitive, Turner. That makes it your business." His gaze shifted to Savannah, partially hidden behind Isaac's broad shoulders. "Miss Moore here is wanted for questioning about a fire at her father's ranch. Mr. Hargrove's concerned for her welfare." "I'm sure he is," Isaac said dryly, "considering his men are the ones who shot her and left her for dead." By now, their confrontation had drawn attention. Several townspeople had stopped to watch, and Savannah noticed Marshal Daniels emerging from his office down the street, alerted by the commotion. Brennan's expression hardened. "Careful with your accusations, Turner. Mr. Hargrove is a respected businessman in these parts." "Not in prosperity he isn't," came a new voice. Ida Raymond strode toward them, her back straight as a ramrod, a shotgun held confidently in her hands. "And neither are his hired thugs." Brennan's hand moved toward his gun, but he froze when he realized both Isaac and Ida had weapons trained on him. His companions, still mounted, shifted uneasily. "This doesn't need to get messy," Brennan said, raising his hand slightly. "We just came to deliver a message. Mr. Hargrove is prepared to be generous $5,000 for the Moore girl to drop any wild accusations and leave the territory. That's good money for a woman with nothing left." "Tell your employer he can keep his blood money," Savannah said, stepping out from behind Isaac despite his attempt to keep her sheltered. "I'll see him hang for what he did to my father." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "Might want to reconsider, miss. Accidents happen. Even in nice little towns like this one." "Is that a threat?" Marshal Daniels asked, arriving with his deputy, both armed. "Because it sounds remarkably like one to me." The odds having shifted decisively against them, Brennan backed toward his horse. Just delivering a business proposition. No law against that. There's law against murder, arson, and witness intimidation, Daniels replied coldly. I suggest you and your friends ride out of Prosperity now, while you still can. And tell Hargrove that federal marshals don't take kindly to local cattle barons interfering with their investigations. With a final venomous glance at Savannah and Isaac, Brennan mounted his horse. This isn't over, he warned before spurring his mount, his companions following as they galloped out of town. In the aftermath of their departure, Ida lowered her shotgun, her expression grim. They'll be back, with more men next time. Daniels nodded in agreement. I'll send a telegram to Cheyenne, try to hurry the federal marshal along. He turned to Isaac and Savannah. In the meantime, I'd advise staying close to the boarding house. I'll post deputies nearby. Savannah's brief taste of freedom now seemed bittersweet as Isaac escorted her back to Ida's, his vigilance heightened by the encounter. The confident stride with which she'd begun their walk was replaced by a weariness born of both physical exertion and the renewed awareness of the danger stalking her. Back at the boarding house, Ida fussed over her, insisting she rest while preparing a pot of tea strong enough to strip paint. Isaac remained silent, his expression thoughtful as he stood by the window, watching the street with the alertness of a man expecting trouble. $5,000, Savannah said finally, breaking the tense silence. Hargrove must be truly worried about my testimony to offer such a sum. He should be, Ida replied, setting a teacup before her. John Moore was well respected in these parts, even if he kept to himself. People won't take kindly to learning he was murdered in cold blood. Isaac turned from the window. It's not just your father, though that would be enough. From what I've gathered in town, Hargrove's been systematically driving smaller ranchers off their land for years using intimidation, sabotage, occasionally violence. Your testimony could be the key to bringing down his entire operation, which makes you extremely valuable, Ida observed. And extremely vulnerable. Savannah sipped her tea, considering their situation. Perhaps I should leave Prosperity, draw Hargrove's attention away from the town. Absolutely not, Isaac and Ida said simultaneously, their vehemence making Savannah blink in surprise. You're safest here, surrounded by people who care about your welfare, Ida continued firmly. Running would only make you an easier target. Isaac nodded in agreement. Besides, the federal marshal is already on his way. We just need to hold out until he arrives. Though their arguments were logical, Savannah couldn't shake the feeling that she had brought danger to people who had shown her nothing but kindness. The thought of Hargrove's men returning in force, possibly harming innocent townspeople in their pursuit of her, was unbearable. I won't hide while others risk themselves for me, she said finally. If Hargrove wants a confrontation, let it be on our terms, not his. Isaac studied her face, recognizing the determination in her expression. What are you suggesting? A trap, Savannah replied simply. Use me as bait to draw out Hargrove or his men, but on ground of our choosing with the marshal and his deputies in position. Ida looked horrified. That's far too dangerous. Savannah, you're still recovering from a bullet wound, for heaven's sake. It's precisely because I'm injured that they might believe I'd run, Savannah argued. Spread word that I've fled Prosperity, headed for the territorial capital to speak directly with the governor. Hargrove's men would certainly try to intercept me on the road. Isaac had gone very still, his expression unreadable. It could work, he said finally, but not with you as the actual bait. What do you mean? Savannah asked. We stage your departure, make it visible, obvious. But you stay hidden here in Prosperity while someone else, a deputy, perhaps takes your place in the coach. Once Hargrove's men make their move, they're caught in the act." Marshal Daniels, who had arrived during this discussion, nodded thoughtfully. "It has merit. We need evidence of Hargrove's intentions to bolster Miss Moore's testimony about the murder." He glanced at Savannah. "But it would mean you'd need to remain completely hidden until after the trap is sprung. No one outside this room can know you're still in town." Savannah considered the plan, seeing both its potential and its risks. "Hargrove's men have seen me now. They'd know if someone else was pretending to be me in the coach." "Not necessarily," Ida interjected. "Sally Peterson's girl is about your build with similar coloring. From a distance, with the right clothes and a hat pulled low, she could pass for you." "And she's Deputy Marshal Holt's fiancée," Daniels added. "He'd ensure her safety, and she's got enough spirit to play the role convincingly." The plan took shape rapidly. A stage would depart Prosperity in 2 days, ostensibly carrying Savannah to Cheyenne. Word would be carefully leaked that she had decided to seek the governor's personal protection rather than wait for the federal marshal. Marshal Daniels and his deputies, along with Isaac, would provide hidden escort, ready to intervene when Hargrove's men made their move. "And where will I be during all this?" Savannah asked. "Here," Ida replied firmly. "In the secret room behind the pantry. This house was built during more dangerous times. There's a space large enough for a person to hide comfortably for days if necessary." As the others discussed details, Isaac pulled Savannah aside, his expression troubled. "I don't like putting you at risk, even indirectly." "I'm already at risk," she reminded him gently. "At least this way we're taking action instead of simply waiting for Hargrove to make his move." He studied her face, concern evident in his green eyes. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," she replied. It's time Hargrove faced consequences for his actions. For my father, for all the others he's hurt. Something shifted in Isaac's expression, respect mingled with a deeper emotion he didn't attempt to hide. "You're remarkable, Savannah Moore." The warmth in his voice sent heat blooming in her cheeks. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "That," he said softly, "is precisely what makes you remarkable." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Daniels called for Isaac's input on the planned route, breaking the spell. As preparations for the trap proceeded over the next 2 days, Savannah found herself conflicted. While she believed in the necessity of their plan, she couldn't help worrying about the risks, particularly to Isaac, who would be riding as hidden escort to the stage. The night before the stage was set to depart, Savannah couldn't sleep. After tossing restlessly for hours, she rose, wrapping a shawl around her nightgown, and made her way downstairs. A light still burned in the parlor, where Isaac had taken to sleeping on the sofa despite Ida's continued offers of a proper room. She found him awake, cleaning his colt by lamplight, his expression focused and distant. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without looking up, somehow aware of her presence despite her silent approach. "Too much on my mind," she admitted, settling into a chair across from him. "You should be resting. Tomorrow will be dangerous." Isaac set the gun aside, his gaze meeting hers. "I've faced worse odds." "That's not as reassuring as you might think," Savannah replied with a faint smile. He acknowledged this with a nod, his own lips curving slightly. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the ticking of the mantel clock the only sound in the quiet house. "Isaac," Savannah said finally, gathering her courage. "If something happens tomorrow, nothing's going to happen," he interrupted firmly. "But if it does," she persisted, "I need you to know." She faltered, the words she wanted to say suddenly seeming too vast, too consequential for the fragile moment. Isaac leaned forward, his expression softening. "What do you need me to know, Savannah?" She drew a deep breath. that these past weeks, despite everything, the danger, the pain, the uncertainty, they've also been the most alive I've ever felt. Because of you. The simple honesty of her admission hung in the air between them. Isaac's eyes never left her face, his gaze intense and searching. "I never expected you," he said softly. "Never expected any of this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing not just the room but the situation that had brought them together. "I've spent years avoiding attachments, connections, anything that might make leaving difficult. And now?" Savannah asked, her heart beating a rapid rhythm in her chest. "Now I find myself thinking about staying," he admitted. "For the first time since Catherine died, I'm thinking about possibilities beyond the next horizon." He rose from his seat and crossed to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. The gesture was both intimate and respectful, his touch warm and sure. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Savannah, know this: finding you in that prairie grass was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because it gave me a chance at redemption, but because it brought you into my life." Tears welled in Savannah's eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. Without thought for propriety or consequence, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them until her lips met his in a gentle, questioning kiss. Isaac remained perfectly still for a heartbeat, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then his hand came up to cradle her cheek, as he returned the kiss with restrained tenderness, mindful of her still healing shoulder and the fragility of the connection forming between them. When they parted, Savannah saw in Isaac's eyes a reflection of her own feelings: wonder, longing, and the dawning realization that what had begun as chance encounter had become something far more significant. "I should go back upstairs," she whispered, though everything in her rebelled against the idea of leaving his presence. Isaac nodded, though he made no move to release her hands. "Tomorrow will end this one way or another. Hargrove won't threaten you again, I promise you that." The certainty in his voice reassured her, though she couldn't entirely banish her fears for his safety. "Be careful, Isaac. I couldn't bear it if you were hurt because of me." "I'll come back to you," he said simply, as if making a vow. "Always." Savannah rose reluctantly, knowing Ida would be scandalized to find her in the parlor with Isaac at such an hour, regardless of the innocence of their encounter. At the doorway she paused, looking back at him tall and steady in the lamplight, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Good night, Isaac." "Good night, Savannah," he replied softly. "Sleep well." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Savannah realized that for the first time since her father's murder, she felt something like peace. Whatever dangers tomorrow might bring, she faced them not alone but with Isaac by her side, a man who had held her through the darkest night of her life without asking for more, yet had somehow given her everything. Dawn broke clear and cool, the rising sun gilding Prosperity's rooftops with golden light. From her hiding place in the secret room behind Ida's pantry, Savannah could see nothing of the town's awakening, aware of events only through the muffled sounds of preparation and occasional updates from Ida. "The stage is ready," her aunt reported, bringing a basket of provisions to sustain Savannah during her confinement. "Sally Peterson's girl is dressed in your blue dress with your shawl and bonnet. From a distance, the resemblance is quite convincing." "And Isaac?" Savannah asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "Checking his horse and weapons one last time," Ida replied with a knowing look. "He's been to your room 3 times already, supposedly to ensure no personal items are left behind that might reveal the ruse." Savannah felt heat rise to her cheeks at her aunt's perceptive tone. "Ida, no need to explain, child," the older woman interrupted gently. "I have eyes, and I approve for what it's worth. Isaac Turner is a good man, perhaps the best I've encountered in these parts." Before Savannah could respond, the sound of hoofbeats outside announced the stage's imminent departure. Ida squeezed her niece's hand reassuringly. "Remember, stay hidden until I come for you, no matter what you hear. It may be hours." Savannah nodded, settling onto the narrow cot that had been prepared for her. As Ida closed the hidden door, plunging the small space into near darkness save for the light of a single oil lamp, Savannah whispered a prayer for the safety of everyone involved in the dangerous plan, especially the green-eyed cowboy who had come to mean everything to her. The hours passed with excruciating slowness. Savannah tried to read by the dim lamplight, attempted to nap, and finally resorted to counting the wooden slats that formed the ceiling of her hiding place. By mid-afternoon, the confinement had become nearly unbearable, her thoughts circling endlessly around the dangers Isaac and the others might be facing. Finally, as shadows lengthened outside, Savannah heard commotion in the main part of the house, voices, footsteps, the sound of the front door opening and closing repeatedly. She sat up, straining to distinguish individual voices, to discern whether they signaled success or disaster. When the hidden door finally swung open, Savannah blinked in the sudden increase of light, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Ida stood there, her expression impossible to read. "It's over," her aunt said simply. "You can come out now." Savannah emerged from her hiding place on unsteady legs, desperate for news. "What happened? Is everyone safe? Is Isaac? See for yourself," Ida replied, gesturing toward the parlor. Savannah moved swiftly through the house, her fears growing with each step. The parlor was crowded with people: Marshal Daniels, several deputies, Sally Peterson and her daughter Emma still dressed in Savannah's clothes, and finally, standing by the window with his back to the room, Isaac. He turned at her entrance, and Savannah's breath caught at the sight of a bloodied bandage wrapped around his upper arm. Yet he was standing, alive, his eyes lighting with relief when he saw her. "It worked," Marshal Daniels announced with grim satisfaction. "Hargrove's men took the bait, tried to ambush the stage in Cottonwood Canyon, just where we expected. 6 of them, including Wheeler and that Brennan fellow who came to town." "Hargrove himself?" Savannah asked, her gaze still fixed on Isaac. "Not present," Daniels replied. "But Wheeler sang like a bird once we had him cornered. Confirmed everything. Hargrove ordered your father's murder, the burning of your ranch, your elimination as a witness. We've got signed statements from 3 of them already." Relief washed over Savannah, momentarily weakening her knees. Isaac moved to her side instantly, his uninjured arm supporting her elbow. "You're hurt," she said, looking up at him with concern. "Bullet grazed me," he dismissed. "Barely worth mentioning." "He took down 2 of Hargrove's men single-handed," Emma Peterson interjected admiringly. "After they shot Deputy Collins from his horse, if Mr. Turner hadn't been there." She shuddered slightly, leaving the thought unfinished. Savannah's hand moved instinctively to Isaac's injured arm, hovering just above the bandage. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," he replied softly, for her ears alone. "I made you a promise, remember." The room gradually cleared as Marshal Daniels and the others departed, eager to share their success with the rest of Prosperity. Ida tactfully busied herself in the kitchen, leaving Savannah and Isaac alone in the parlor. "Is it really over?" Savannah asked, still struggling to believe the danger had passed. Isaac nodded, guiding her to sit beside him on the sofa. "The federal marshal arrived just as we were bringing in the prisoners. He's already sent men to arrest Hargrove at his ranch. By morning, he'll be in custody, facing charges for your father's murder and a dozen other crimes. And Wheeler," The man who actually shot my father will hang, Isaac said simply. His own confession ensures it. Savannah absorbed this, surprised by the complexity of her emotions. There was relief, certainly, and a sense of justice served. Yet she felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure in the fate awaiting her father's killers, only a deep weariness and the beginning awareness that vengeance, even just vengeance, could not restore what had been lost. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly uncertain of her path forward. Isaac took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "That depends on you. Your testimony will still be needed at the trial, but that's months away. In the meantime, your life is your own again." "My own," she repeated thoughtfully. "I'm not sure I know what that means anymore. The ranch is gone. Father is gone. I have no home to return to." "You have your aunt," Isaac pointed out, "and from what I've observed, she'd be delighted to have you stay in Prosperity permanently." "Yes," Savannah agreed. "Ida has been wonderful, and Prosperity is a good town with good people." She hesitated, gathering her courage before meeting his gaze directly. "But what about you, Isaac? Will you stay? Or is the next horizon calling now that the danger has passed?" The question hung between them, laden with significance they both recognized. Isaac's answer would determine not just his future but potentially hers as well. He was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke, his voice was steady with certainty. "The only horizon that interests me now is the one I might share with you, Savannah." Joy bloomed within her, bright and unexpected. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you," he interrupted gently. "That's somewhere between finding you wounded on the prairie and watching you face down Hargrove's men with more courage than most men I've known. I fell in love with your strength, your compassion, your determination." Tears welled in Savannah's eyes, but they were tears of happiness rather than sorrow. "I love you too, Isaac. I think I have since that first night in the line shack when you held me through the darkness and asked for nothing in return." Isaac's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "I want to build a life with you, Savannah. Here in Prosperity or wherever you wish to go, even to see that ocean you've dreamed of." "You remembered," she whispered, touched by the reference to a conversation held days ago when they were still virtual strangers. "I remember everything about you," he replied. "Every word, every smile, every moment of courage in the face of fear." Savannah leaned into his touch, her heart full to bursting. "I don't need the ocean anymore. I found what I was really looking for: freedom, yes, but also belonging. With you." Isaac's smile was tender as he leaned forward to claim her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, a kiss that spoke of protection without possession, of strength shared rather than imposed, of a love born in danger but destined to flourish in peace. When they parted, Isaac kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Marry me, Savannah Moore, not today, not tomorrow, when you're ready, when you've had time to be sure this is what you want." "I'm already sure," she replied without hesitation. "But yes, we can wait. Build something solid first." A discreet cough from the doorway announced Ida's return. The older woman regarded them with poorly concealed delight. "I see congratulations are in order," she observed dryly. Savannah blushed but didn't move away from Isaac. "Is it that obvious?" "Child, it's been obvious since the day he carried you half dead to my doorstep and refused to leave your side," Ida replied. "I'm just pleased you've both finally acknowledged what everyone else has seen for weeks." Isaac laughed, the sound surprisingly carefree from a man who had faced death mere hours earlier. "Your approval means a great deal, Mrs. Raymond." "Ida," she corrected firmly. "If you're to be my nephew-in-law, you'll call me Ida like everyone else." She fixed him with a stern look that didn't quite hide her approval. Though I expect you to continue sleeping on the sofa until a proper wedding, I run a respectable establishment." "Yes, madam," Isaac agreed solemnly, though his eyes danced with amusement as he glanced at Savannah. The weeks that followed brought a flurry of changes. Hargrove's arrest sent shockwaves through the territory, as smaller ranchers who had suffered under his tyranny came forward with their own stories of intimidation and violence. The federal marshal expanded his investigation, uncovering a network of corruption that reached into the territorial government itself. For Savannah, the period was one of healing, not just of her physical wound, which gradually faded to a silvery scar, but of the deeper injuries to her spirit. With Isaac by her side, she faced the necessary legal proceedings with courage, her testimony at the preliminary hearing clear and unwavering despite Hargrove's intimidating presence in the courtroom. As summer deepened into autumn, Savannah and Isaac began building their future together. With compensation awarded by the territorial court for her father's murder and the destruction of the ranch, Savannah purchased a small property on the outskirts of prosperity, not a grand spread like Hargrove's, but good land with a stream running through it, enough for a modest herd and the simple home they planned to build. Isaac, to the surprise of many and the delight of Marshal Daniels, accepted a position as deputy marshal of prosperity. His experience and quiet authority quickly earned the respect of the townspeople, while his commitment to justice, tempered by compassion, made him an ideal peacekeeper for the growing settlement. On a crisp October day, with the aspen trees blazing gold against the mountains, Savannah Moore became Savannah Turner in a ceremony attended by the entire town. Ida, resplendent in her best dress and openly weeping despite her earlier insistence that such displays were unseemly, gave the bride away in the absence of any male relatives. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night with music, dancing, and enough food to feed a cattle drive. Through it all, Isaac never strayed far from Savannah's side, his hand often finding hers as if reassuring himself that their happiness was real and not some dream that might vanish with the dawn. When they finally departed for the small cabin, Isaac had built on their new property a temporary home. Until the larger house was completed, the townspeople lined the street, calling good wishes and tossing flower petals in their path. Alone at last, Isaac lifted Savannah from their wagon and carried her across the threshold of their cabin, setting her gently on her feet in the room illuminated only by moonlight streaming through the windows. "Welcome home, Mrs. Turner," he said softly, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. Savannah looked around the simple space at the bed Isaac had crafted himself, the quilt Ida had given them as a wedding gift, the few pieces of furniture they'd acquired, each representing a step toward their shared future. "It's perfect," she whispered, meaning not just the cabin but everything their life together promised to be. Isaac's arms encircled her, drawing her against his chest in an embrace that felt like coming home. "I never thought I'd find this," he admitted, his voice low and reverent. "A place that feels right. A woman who makes me want to be better than I am." Savannah tilted her face up to his, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had saved her in more ways than she could count. "You held me through the darkest night of my life without asking for anything in return," she said softly. "Now we have all our nights ahead of us together." As moonlight silvered the room around them, Isaac Turner kissed his bride with all the tenderness and passion she had awakened in him, a man who had once believed himself destined to wander alone, now anchored by love to the woman in his arms and the life they would build together. And Savannah, who had once believed her fate was to remain forever dutiful but unloved, surrendered herself completely to the protection of the cowboys, embraced no longer afraid of the darkness. for she had found her light in him. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the Turner Ranch house, mingling with the spring breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers from the surrounding meadows. Savannah paused in her baking, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron as she moved to the doorway to watch her family. Isaac was in the yard, their 3-year-old son John perched on his shoulders while 4-year-old Catherine chased butterflies nearby, her dark hair so like her father's streaming behind her like a banner. The sight never failed to fill Savannah's heart with joy so intense it bordered on pain. 5 years had transformed the modest property they'd purchased into one of the most prosperous small ranches in the area. Not through ambitious expansion like Hargrove had pursued, but through careful stewardship of the land and livestock, and the reputation for honesty that brought fair prices for their cattle and horses. Isaac still served as deputy marshal, though now only part-time as the ranch demanded more of his attention. Prosperity had grown into a substantial town, with a school where Savannah taught 3 days a week, when Ida, now officially Grandma Ida, to the children came to watch John and Catherine. William Hargrove had hanged for his crimes 2 years earlier, his empire dismantled and divided among those he had wronged. Wheeler and the other men directly involved in John Moore's murder had preceded their employer to the gallows. Justice, so elusive in the early days of the territory, had finally been served. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Savannah's attention to the road. A lone rider approached at a leisurely pace, a familiar figure that brought a smile to her lips. "Silas is here," she called to Isaac, who turned with a grin, lifting John from his shoulders to set him on the ground. The old prospector, now a regular visitor to the Turner Ranch, dismounted with the stiffness of advancing age but the same bright eyes and ready smile that had greeted them on that fateful day in the ravine. "Uncle Silas," Catherine cried, abandoning her butterflies to race toward him. He caught her in a hug, his weathered face creasing with pleasure. "Got something for you, little miss," he said, reaching into his saddlebag to produce a small wooden horse, intricately carved. Catherine accepted it with delight while John tugged at the old man's pants leg, demanding his own treasure. Savannah moved to greet him, embracing the man who had become like family. "Perfect timing, Silas. Dinner's almost ready." "Wouldn't miss your cooking for all the gold in the mountains," he replied with a wink. "Besides, got news to share." Over a meal of venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, Silas recounted his latest prospecting expedition into the high country, embellishing for the children's benefit with tales of bears, mountain lions, and hidden caves filled with crystals that sparkled like stars. When the children had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses, the adults settled on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains with fiery gold and deep purple. "Real news now," Silas said, accepting a cup of coffee from Savannah. "Railroads coming through." Survey crew was marking the route last week, just 20 miles south. Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "Mayor mentioned it might. Good for Prosperity's growth, though it'll change things." "Change is the only constant out here," Silas observed philosophically. "Seen it all my life. Wild places tamed, settlements turning to towns, towns to cities." "Do you regret it?" Savannah asked. "The changes?" Silas considered the question, stroking his white beard. "Some miss the days when a man could ride for weeks without seeing another soul. But then," he smiled at them both, "I see what you've built here, not just a ranch, but a family, a community. Hard to regret that." Isaac's arm slipped around Savannah's waist, drawing her closer against his side as the evening air cooled. "No regrets here," he said simply. Savannah leaned into his embrace. thinking of the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a terrified, wounded young woman fleeing for her life to the contented wife and mother she had become. From a solitary cowboy with no fixed home to the man beside her, rooted now in love and purpose. "I've been thinking," Isaac said after Silas had departed for his small cabin in the foothills, a permanent guest house built specially for his frequent visits, "about that ocean you've always wanted to see." Savannah looked up at him in surprise. "What about it?" "Railroad coming means easier travel. Maybe next spring we could take a trip. Show the children San Francisco, let you finally see those ships and harbors your father told you about." Warmth bloomed in Savannah's chest at the thoughtfulness of his suggestion. "You do that." "Leave the ranch, the town." Isaac smiled, the same smile that still made her heart race after 5 years of marriage. "For you, in a heartbeat." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch as tender as it had been on that first night when he'd held her through the darkness. "Besides, I made you a promise once to show you all the horizons you dreamed of." "You've already given me more than I ever dreamed," Savannah replied softly. "But yes, I'd like that, to see the ocean with you and our children." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, planning their journey to the distant sea. Above them, stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky, the same stars Savannah's father had claimed were clearer in the west than anywhere else on earth. Looking up at them now, secure in the love of the man beside her and the family they had created together, Savannah knew her father had been right. The stars were indeed clearer here, or perhaps it was simply that her vision had been clarified by love, by purpose, by the journey that had begun in fear and blood, but had led to this perfect moment of peace. Later that night, as she lay beside Isaac in their bed, Savannah reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. How a night of terrible violence had ultimately led to a lifetime of love. How a cowboy who had held her through the darkness without asking for more had ended up giving her everything. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac murmured, his arm tightening around her waist. Savannah turned in his embrace, meeting his gaze in the moonlight that filtered through their bedroom window. "About the first night we spent together in that lined shack. How frightened I was. How safe you made me feel." Isaac's expression softened with memory. "You were the bravest woman I'd ever met, still are." "I wasn't brave," she contradicted gently. "I was terrified, but you gave me courage. You still do every day." His hand came up to cup her cheek, a gesture that had become familiar yet never lost its power to move her. "That works both ways, you know. You make me braver too, better." As Isaac's lips found hers in a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of their years together, Savannah gave thanks for the journey that had brought them here, for every step, every struggle, every moment of doubt and fear that had ultimately led to this life they had built together. She had never slept beside a man until a cowboy had held her through the night without asking for more. Now, every night brought the same miracle: the safety of his arms, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, the certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. It was more than enough. It was everything.